Okay, well let's go back to the Iran negotiations and where you think this is headed. So to me, it sounds like we are just on the fast track to war. I've heard that Iran has changed its military posture from a defensive posture to an offensive posture. Is this significant? Does that actually just is it just saying that we got our fingers on the trigger and that we're ready to
Yeah,
go at any
I,
minute?
I don't know. I think that that's probably what it is. That they understand it's like when they can't just wait and take a beating, then that they'll be weakened and they won't be able to respond so forcefully. They need to have their finger on the trigger, and if they see the missiles and the aircraft incoming, they really should fire them. Right away, because then they can do the maximum damage. And they have to let the Americans and Israelis know that they've got their finger on the trigger, and hopefully that can act as a deterrent. I don't know that it will, but unfortunately, I think probably it will not. It just seems like, there are just too many obstacles in the way to a solution. There's just no need for this, but it looks like that's where we're headed.
I know you hate giving odds and percentages, but it just sounds like this is it. We're coming to this, right? You don't see an off ramp, or you see it's very unlikely.
It's not. It seems very unlikely. I mean, it's just like I've said, there are two things that are going against it. One is the obvious pressure coming from Netanyahu and his government, and he clearly does have just a lot of levers. And again, it's not like it's Trump himself has made himself vulnerable. Let's set Epstein aside and all that, but just it's by the people that he's put around him. The people that are on Fox News. It's just like everybody is pushing him in that direction, and he can be. He occasionally does have his moments of independence, but we see again and again that he can be pushed. And especially I think when it comes to Israel, and then say, well, even if he does declare his independence and say, no, then I ain't doing this, because this is going to be really, really bad, and it's not going to help me. It's not going to help the Republicans in the midterm elections, et cetera, et cetera. I can't do this. We got to make a deal. I just don't think that there's almost just a lack of competence right there. If you really, and there's already such a deep, deep mistrust on the part of the Iranians that you're going to actually have to go farther than you would have gone, you were prepared to go before. You're probably going to have to go farther than the JCPOA went. One thing the Iranians are saying, and I think this is very reasonable, is that, we want to have the sanctions relief up front. We've got to see that that's passed by Congress and that it's really going to happen, because we were, deceived last time.
That'll never happen.
Yeah. So you're just looking at that. But you can see why the Iranians would demand that, because, they have been lied to in the past, more than once. It just seems like the obstacles are overwhelming. They're obstacles of our own making, and of Trump's in particular. So even if he doesn't want to, I don't think he really seems to have painted himself into a corner. Now, you never can say it's impossible. Trump sometimes just surprises us. He turns around. We look at that on Greenland, but Greenland's different because there wasn't people constantly telling, Trump, you got to do this. You got to do this.
Right.
Even on Fox News, I think there was something like, what's this all about? We're not quite sure what's going on here. But in this case, you do have those people around him saying, you got to do this. You've got to do this. And he's made it so difficult to extricate himself. He's brought the armada there. He's made these declarations, and now it's going to be very, very hard for him to back down.
Yeah, I was just thinking with Venezuela, did other than making us look like a global mafia, did it actually accomplish anything? Can we say that there was anything victorious in that operation? I mean, I think Trump is running off that high, but if we just look at it in terms of a geopolitical calculation, did we actually change the balance of things? Or
well, I mean, it's put real severe pressure on Cuba. Venezuela is no longer supplying oil to them, and then Trump threatened Mexico. That was the country that stepped into the gap and started providing some oil to Cuba, and he threatened them with tariffs in his usual manner. And so Mexico has stopped exporting oil to Cuba. Now Cuba's in a real jam. It's, you can say from the point of view of just domination of the hemisphere, it was successful. Now it hasn't really changed like the political makeup of the Venezuelan government. And then there was all that talk about democracy and whatever. And then once the abduction was carried out, you just said, oh, no, Machado doesn't have any real support, which is probably true. She has the support of a minority of people. There's an acknowledgement that actually the government, it does reflect the popular will. And they just, so that hasn't changed. But that government, they know they're weak and they have to proceed very carefully. Their oil tankers are being seized and just stolen. The oil is simply stolen. I guess it's sold and the money goes to some fund set up under Trump himself personally, not the U.S. Treasury, and then they get back some share of it. I mean, the whole thing is just so extraordinary. Again, any one of these things would be huge news, and it would be a huge scandal in any past years. But there's so many things happening now that we can't even keep track of it. So Venezuela the government hasn't fallen, it hasn't kowtowed to the U.S., but it is aware of its own weakness and is treading very carefully. One thing I think it's really a failure on the part of so many Latin American countries that failed to stand by Venezuela. You just said, well, there were these differences. Well, Lula didn't like Maduro and whatever. Let's just say, so what? If you have a power of behaving this way so recklessly and aggressively, you can't just let that power, pick off its opponents one by one. In the end, it's going to be you. That's at risk. And this is something that we're seeing. It's not just in Latin America, but you arguably around the world.
Yeah, I think people are coming to that conclusion now. But I mean, we're kind of Monday, night quarterbacking here with, we didn't expect this kidnapping. I think
we were expecting an attack.
We were expecting something,
right.
some kind, but we didn't. I don't think anybody was expecting this type of kidnapping operation with zero casualties. That there wouldn't. People were expecting there to be some type of fight. I think.
Yeah. Well, over 100 Venezuelans were killed in it.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I mean, American casualties. Of course,
right.
I don't want to diminish anything on the other side. Yeah. It's just that I think I've heard somebody call it a catastrophic success, that Venezuela operation, because I really just do feel like Trump has this belief in the U.S. military that is unjustified. And then that's going to lead him into this thing with Iran. It's like we didn't lose a single man in Venezuela. This will be, we can do this all over again. We'll just make it bigger and badder. And then
I think that's a real danger. I think that's right.
The thing is, once this thing kicks off, it's just going to go off the rails immediately. It's not going to be like the Ukraine war where there was this sort of careful escalation and this long drawn out, maybe it's better that it doesn't go that way, because if we look at what's going on in Ukraine, I mean, it's been going on so long and so many people have died, but I just see this instantly, because this is a missile war, and there are U.S. bases that are just targets that are there. Those are all going to get hit. Israel, tiny country, all of its military bases and infrastructure and all these things, they're targeted. They're just going to, on day one, when this happens, all of those are going to get hit. Likely a few ships will get sunk. And then it just, boof, this thing will just explode immediately.
The risk of that is very great. I don't know exactly what targets they've decided on. Maybe all of them, or maybe they're going to focus on just the bases. I don't know.
I heard 20 targets were already selected. I saw it on just some YouTube video. Who knows if it's true?
Yeah, but who knows? I don't think the Iranians are going to be telling anybody else.
Yeah, well, I heard that it was on. I heard it was on some IRGC type of media that they were trying to just say as a warning that it went out in public coverage, like, look, we're ready for this. We're ready. Right. It does feel like Iran is a lot more confident. They're behaving more confidently.
Yeah, they haven't shown any signs of backing down. I think it was just the other day that Iraqi said, "Yeah, we're going to hit military bases if you strike us." And it was a member of parliament of the Iranian parliament that said that Yeah, that actually that the Americans had talked about doing one of these symbolic exchanges, and he said, no, the Iranian government just told him, no, you strike us, and we're going to hit you back hard.
Is
Nothing
you think
symbolic. That doesn't work anymore.
Do you think this confidence is stemming somewhat from that perhaps they have capabilities that they did not possess 7 months ago, thanks to the Chinese and the Russians?
That may be. We don't know. That's a big question mark. We don't know. We don't know how much air defense they have. Yeah, they may
Or
be.
offensive capabilities?
Yeah, that's true. Both things. We don't know. That may be it. Another possibility, though, is just that they realize that, they have been backed into a corner and this has become existential. They have tried showing restraint. They have tried the symbolic exchanges, all these things, and it has failed. Pezeshkian himself was just like bent over backwards trying to be nice to the West and the Americans and, to show themselves to be reasonable and whatever. And it just didn't work. And so now they have run out of options. So I think that's part of it too. It's just like, regardless, you say there's our only way, that we're going to survive is if we do fight back hard, if they come in swinging, because we know that they have made it clear what they want to do, that they are set on destroying our country. And, if we agree to some sort of, symbolic exchange this time, it's just they're going to come back in a couple of months, another surprise attack, another, insurrection or whatever. It's those days are over. We understand what this is about. And so we just have to start fighting now.
Yeah, I just feel like Iran should try to start it off on their terms, because it seems like, it's all about waiting for the U.S. Israel to do an attack and then they could justify it. And I almost feel like the U.S. and Israel is trying to goad potentially Iran into striking first to be able to frame it as like, look at Iran, this aggressor in the region, and they're the real problem. But if Iran maybe pushes harder in these negotiations and these demands, that maybe they could give themselves the impetus, for, like we said before, maybe say, we're behind Trump's phase 2 part of the peace plan. It's got to be implemented. We got to see this, like, I'm just wondering if there's some way that instead of, there's always some weird pretext given for the United States or Israel to conduct the strike. Is there any pretext or pretense that Iran can put out so that they can be like, look, this is why we have to do it in a defensive posture? I mean, just looking at it, it's like, hey, your ships, your bases are all around us. It's like, you have to move your ships out, or else, we'll give you 1 week, or else we're going to start shooting, or give you something like this. I don't know, just like, instead of waiting for this inevitable strike.
Yeah. Well, I think they have to. I mean, it's just like any sort of offensive, preemptive, like we said, it would be justified in so many ways. It's just like, again, the U.S. and Israel has launched these surprise attacks against them in the past, is waging economic warfare against them. They would be justified in striking. But how, they have been demonized to such an extent that anything, even if it's completely justified, will be taken as further proof that this is just an evil regime that's out of control. So they have to tread carefully. I think it's just, they'll have to wait for the other side to make the first move to attack and make it clear that they're the aggressors, and then punch back. I don't know what else they can do. They do. We don't hear about it in the West, but in speaking to the rest of the world, they do tie themselves very closely to what's happening in Gaza, and they say, we're all part of this, and this is why we are being attacked. I mean, recently, Arachi made a speech at it was a gathering, I guess, some sort of Al Jazeera conference, which is sometimes anti-Iranian, by the way, because they tend to have this connection with the Sunni sectarians, the extremists. But yeah, he made it clear, that this is like, it's not just about us. Our fate is tied to Palestine in so many ways. And I think that is a message that is that they have made, within the Middle East, and is pretty well understood, and in the global South as well.
Okay, well, I guess we're just going to have to wait and see, but it sounds like we're probably not going to have to wait that long. Do you expect, if something's going to happen relatively quickly?
Probably, it might be soon after Netanyahu's visit. Again, we don't know exactly what it is that they're trying to get in place, but that's what the reports are. That they're moving around these air defense assets and installing them, and that seems to be the once that particular deployment is completed, then I think probably they'll go ahead with a strike. And I hope against hope it won't happen, but it certainly looks like it's going to happen.